camera on, please, so everyone can see you. That to be helpful as well. If not, that's also fine. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're ready to kick off. And obviously, first and foremost, I'd just like to thank you all for tuning in tonight. And an even bigger thank you to you, Regi, Nkosinathi, and Gavin for giving of your time. We really do appreciate it. I'm an art enthusiast, and I'm looking extremely forward to tonight's talk. Tonight's artists are some of South Africa's most renowned and award-winning artists and recognized on a global scale. Regi Bardavid is one of South Africa's few artists who has stuck with the genre of abstraction. Nkosinathi Thomas art is subjectively and universally inspired by diversity. His core inspirations are nature, culture, society, humanity, beauty, and architecture. Gavin Rain is best known for his neo. Gavin was recently commissioned to do a painting of the Rebbe in order to raise money for a greater charitable cause. It is truly an honor to have you all on tonight's talk. So I don't want to waste any more precious time, and I'd rather hear from all of you tonight. So I think let's start with you, Regi. Maybe you can just give us some insight and a brief background into your journey and life up until this point. Maybe why you became an artist. Did you have formal art training? Did you go to art school? What your parents maybe thought when you told them you're becoming an artist, and maybe just share some insights into your most memorable moments as being a South African artist. I know I've asked you quite a lot there, but let's go as much as you want or as little as you want. But I believe just before you start, we will share some photos of art, and then we will hand over to you. But once again, thank you, all three of you, for your time, and I'm really looking forward to the evening.
Regi, you are on mute. If you could perhaps click the unmute. Regi, you're still on mute.
On mute. Sorry.
There we go.
Hold on.
There we go.
Better.
Thank you.
Okay, so I should repeat what happened. Okay, it's just that I'm presently exhibiting at the Melrose Gallery in Johannesburg. Now, when you talk about parents, I started making art after having my children. So I was already married. I was living in the Congo. My children were 5 and 2. And I had a very superficial lifestyle in the Congo. We'd go play cards in the morning, have lunches, the ladies. And I got bored with this lifestyle. So I bought myself some crepe paper, took pictures of my kids, and started copying. Naturally, the work that came out was awful. But I enjoyed so much the time spent at my dining room table that this became my passion. So we were in the Congo until we had to come to Johannesburg because things were impossible. The president was President Mobutu Sese Seko. So we settled in Johannesburg, and I was fortunate to be introduced to Bill Ainsley and started going to the Johannesburg Art Foundation. Give me anyone to start and tell me the story about.
Guys, everybody else, please put yourself on mute.
No, you continue. Interesting story.
Okay, thank you. 4 years later, after being at the Johannesburg Art Foundation, I wanted to go and go to UNISA so that I could learn all about art, because though Ainsley taught mainly about American abstract expressionism, not only American, abstract expressionism. And so to register at UNISA, I needed a matric. I didn't have a matric for family reasons. So actually, that was my biggest achievement at the age of 40, to write my matric and then go on to UNISA. And I got my degree in 4 years. I actually was writing my dissertation when my son Albert was writing his matric. And we were all very happy. Unfortunately, a couple of years later, my husband was shot at work. And this tragedy obviously traumatized us all, and our lives were completely shattered. Why I'm telling you the story is that art for me is a healer. And I realized that during the month, after sitting Shiva, etc., during the month of mourning, my mother-in-law, everybody had come to live with us. But at night, I would go into my garage, which was my studio, and find solace drawing on long sheets of paper, 2 meters by 1 meter. I used charcoal, pencil, and erasers so that I couldn't paint on top and spoil or delete what was underneath. I just wanted to be whatever had happened to me. So when a sheet was full, I would roll it up. This took about 3 to 5 months. Then the National Gallery needed some works of mine for some special occasion. I sent them these. There were 5 of them without editing them. I titled them the Grief Series. And later, when R.B. Sachs needed works for his new constitutional court, I told him he could take this. He wanted a color painting. I said, either this or nothing, because that was an effigy for my late husband. So this is the story that I wanted to impart. I also want to tell you the title of my dissertation, because that connects with my being loyal with how I started and how I am today. Gavin was saying that I'm still in doing abstract art, when the title of my dissertation was The Unconscious as a Medium Towards Creativity and Intuitive Insight. And 30 years later, it's what I wrote, as a poem on the exhibition at the Melrose Gallery. So it's still my mantra. If I carry on, I just want to say that my art making is a search for the self, for a home, for an idyllic other world. The images are not a reflection of the world nor life. Rather, they are a rendering of beauty, truth, kindness on another level, virtues that I would like to strive for. That's all. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Wow, really, really motivating and moving, and really thank you.
Amazing to hear, Regi.
I think before we jump straight into questions with you, Regi, I'm sure people have a lot of questions ready. I know I have 1 or 2. I think, Thomas, if we can jump to you, and hear your background, a brief background to your journey and your life up to this point in time. If you can share some of that insight, it would really be also interesting to hear. So if we can jump over to you, I think we're also going to play a short clip of your art before you do speak, and then after that you can take it away. Thank you. Perfect. Over to you, Thomas. I just think you're on mute. Can you hear us?
Hi, Haley.
There we go. We can hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Perfectly, loud and clear.
Yeah, we got you, Thomas.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Thomas?
You can hear me? I
Yes.
can't hear you.
Oh, we can hear you perfectly. We can hear you perfectly.
The voices are croaky. Okay, all right. So I'm just going to introduce myself then. I don't know what the question was. All right.
Wow.
So yeah, my name is Nkosinathi Thomas Ngulube. I'm a sculptor and I'm a painter. My career started out as, I'm just going to answer, I don't know the question. So I'm just going to introduce myself like that.
Perfect. Can you hear me now?
So yeah,
you still can't hear me.
Can you hear myself or Hilliard?
I can hardly hear.
Perhaps what we'll do is, Thomas, we will post it in the chat room, the question, and you can look at it over there.
I just did that now.
Okay. All right, I got you. All right. Yeah. So I studied art only as an art seller. Coming from the province of Mpumalanga to Joburg, I fell in love with what artists were doing, and that was just post 1994. And most of the artists that I used to sell their artworks to clients were kind of like illiterate. So I enjoyed the process. But growing up, my parents never liked me to be an artist. So I also ended up looking at art as something that is dirty. So right through school, I never studied art. So coming to Joburg, I started selling art for the artists, but I was more attracted by the money itself that I was making. So I used to take their works, go to places that are close to Hillbrow, which were more like your Parktown, Parkhurst, and Rosebank. So I used to carry like sculptures on my shoulders to go and sell to clients. But then it so happened that as time went on, my clients wanted they gave commissions, but the artists just couldn't meet the briefs for the clients. So I started out then in my backyard because I'd seen the tools of the trade and the materials. I started out carving out the briefs that the clients had commissioned. So on my delivering one of them, I found that actually the clients were mesmerized with that. So that is how I started to scout. So since then, I never looked back then. Then 10 years into my scouting, I started to paint as well. And I'll also do that and sell on the streets, right in the suburban streets up North Joburg. And then thereafter, I got selected to be at Artists Under the Sun, which was at Zulek, which was quite a public space to sell your art. And I grew out of that because like my work couldn't fit to the public market, like a flea market. So that's when I started knocking doors on art galleries, and I will leave my artworks on consignment. So growing up and maturing through that in my career, I ended up opening my own art gallery, which is more, that is where I'm selling art from. So yeah, that's the journey that I've taken up to now.
Wow, absolutely phenomenal as well. I think both you and Regi really have amazing stories, and I think we're going to delve into that further. Thomas, sorry,
Sorry, Hilly, I still can't hear.
Okay, I'm going to post the next questions in the private chat directly to you. But just in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to Gavin and kind of ask him the same questions. But before we do that, we'll just show some of Gavin's art, and then over to you, Gavin.
Wow. Short and sweet.
Yeah, over to you.
Thanks, Hilly. I'll try to answer the same sorts of questions. I do have formal training. I studied art at the University of Cape Town, Michaelis School of Fine Art, where I studied art history, and I then did my practical training at Ruth Prowse in Cape Town, which is the oldest freestanding building in Cape Town, other than the castle, they tell me. But the only thing I really remember was that it had the best hot chocolate vending machine in the world. It's a good tip if everyone's ever there.
Hopefully it's still there, taking it away.
I hope it's still there, because I would be devastated if we lost that national treasure. You know, as for the journey, I mean, just listening to Nkosinathi and Regi, you know, I don't think anyone really sets out to become an artist right off the bat. Partly because of those exact socioeconomic pressures that we've already discussed. But it's also something of a journey. And I think being an artist is something that you kind of discover along the way, as you discover yourself and you discover your environment. But, you know, I do remember that art was the earliest thing I can remember that made me happy was to draw, to sketch as a young kid. So it was actually no real surprise to my parents that I ended up becoming an artist, even though I went to university ostensibly to study architecture. I ended up studying neuropsychology, and then kind of meandered around until I got back into art. My master's thesis in psychology was on face perception with autistic children and how they perceived faces, and it stuck with me. And I remember spending a lot of time thinking about this, because people on the spectrum, specifically autistic people, process faces very differently to normal people or more sort of regular brained people. And it kind of stuck with me, and I ended up wanting to express this in terms of art. And at the time, I was teaching at the Cape Town School of Photography, and I was very interested in photography, having grown up with it. My grandfather was a professional photographer, and I ended up, you know, pottering around his darkroom. And I remember looking at this, thinking, I'd really like to, you know, digital photography had just started, and I was looking to see, could I do a painting that went from digital back to analog, you know, expressing something to look like maybe a digital painting with dots and things like this, and then do that actually as a painting. And it took me a few years to figure out the mathematics behind it. It was a grueling process. So, I mean, I started in art, and only a couple of years later did I do my first painting. But, you know, one of the questions I think I'm asked a lot is, you know, what is it to be an artist? And I always say, for me, it's about the things that are in my mind. The art itself is a byproduct of that, but the actual art is what takes place in your mind, and it's your experience of the world, and then the art comes later. But so I went a fairly traditional route, I suppose one would say, having had some formal training in art, but I came to art studies via psychology. My two great loves are art and mathematics, art and science. So it kind of made sense to me to end up with the style that I currently have, which is fairly mathematical. In fact, it starts out as mathematics, and then only later in the process do I actually start the physical painting of it. One more thing, my most memorable moment as a South African artist, that's actually quite easy. In 2011, I was invited by Costa Rica to the Venice Biennale to take part, which is like, you know, the world champs of art. And by then, we didn't have a South African pavilion, which is why Costa Rica ended up inviting me. Franco Anselmi, who was the curator, I met with him in Venice, and I was doing a different show then. He was like, he really liked the work, and I was just like, this is the curator of the Biennale. So he invited me to show with Costa Rica. And then after that, subsequent to that, South Africa decided they were going to do a pavilion, but it was like lastminute.com, and like everything fell apart. And I was already there hanging my work, and I heard that South Africa had a pavilion. I didn't even know South Africa was entering. So I rushed. I thought, oh, I've got to go see it. But the problem was that the South African team for the Biennale hadn't, I don't know, negotiations broke down. Let's just put it that way. And as you know, Venice is canals. And so I could see the South African pavilion, but I couldn't get to it because they hadn't built the bridge. They were building a temporary bridge to get to the South African pavilion, but it hadn't been built. So the only way to get there was by boat, but there was a boat strike that day. So I could just kind of wave across the canal at the South African pavilion from the Arsenale side, which was pretty memorable for me and kind of a metaphor, I guess.
I hope you had a flag on your back or something that you could wave up.
Say again?
You should have had a big flag on your back or something that you could wave up.
Well, they actually had a flag on the wall, like South African pavilion over here. And I was like, well, that's great, but I can't get to you. I'm also South African. So, I mean, I could shout across the canali, but that was as close as I got to the show. Anyway, that's my story in a nutshell.
Great. Well, thank you, all three of you, for sharing that. And I think there's something that's, you know, there's a bit of a contradicting journey that all three of you have been on. Gavin, you've had formal training. Regi and Nkosinathi, you guys have kind of had the more informal, kind of put the brush to the paint, if you can call it that. And this asks me, it kind of leads on to the next question. When looking at a piece of art and valuing it, you know, obviously values in the eye of the beholder, but looking at a piece of art that is being created or developed by a person who has formal training, be someone who doesn't, is it easy to identify that, and does that impact value, and how do people get around that, or how do people perceive that in any way? And Gavin, maybe you can share some of that, and then over to you, Regi and Thomas, if you guys have any insight into that. So just, you know, for my own insight.
I'll start with an obvious little story about Picasso. You guys probably heard of him, Spanish guy. And this is probably more of a myth, but it illustrates your point. He was approached in a restaurant, and the man walked up to him and asked him to do a sketch on a napkin for him, which Picasso complied with. It was of a goat, funnily enough. Handed it to him and said, that'll cost you $100,000. The man was horrified and shocked, and he said, I don't understand. It only took you 5 minutes. And Picasso's reply, which is sort of echoed down the annals of art history, was, it didn't take me 5 minutes, it took me 40 years. So I think the sort of the story there is that if you're looking at value in art, you're actually looking at value in the artists themselves, not the product. And as I said earlier, art is very much about what goes on in one's mind, and then the actual painting or sculpture is an expression of that art. It's not the art itself. The art stays in your mind, and you try as best you can to put it out there. And in terms of interpreting value in art, it really is about interpreting value in the artist and what the artist is trying to achieve. So that's where I would say you would start, by looking from an investment or an intellectual or economic or structural point of view.
That makes perfect sense in my mind. Regi, is there anything that you would like to add to that as well? Sorry, Regi, unmute yourself. Regi, unmute. Sorry. You still on mute? There we go.
Good.
There we
Good.
go.
I'm doing something. The little thought, the short thought that I'd like to add to Gavin speech is that in today's world, there are many conceptual artists who are very good artists, but they're not good craftsmen. There is a man by the name of Maurizio Catalan, and the latest thing that he did in a prestigious art fair was take a banana and with a masking tape, put it against the wall.
I was at the show, Reg. I saw the banana. Horrified.
that is considered art, but it's what he has done previously that makes him a good artist. So nowadays you cannot see if it's the artisan behind it. It depends. It's also up to the galleries to take a good artist up to dizzying heights. That's all I wanted to tell you.
Yeah, I think I saw.
By the way, he sold the banana, Reg.
Yeah, I saw he sold it for an absolute fortune. I was watching another guy. Somebody put $1 million, I think it was, of cash in a plastic bag, in a see-through bag, and they dropped it in the middle of the gallery, and it also drew the attention of the press and went overnight.
But these are important conceptual artists because they come out with such ideas from otherworldly, and I don't think the art they make is sellable as such. It's the idea, the event, the happening that is important. I think so. I don't know.
Do you think that social media and the influence social media has on people today, in today's age, that, you know, that is considered art? I'm saying 100 years ago, 60 years ago, people weren't aware of these types of illustrations and people wouldn't have access to them. So do you think it's just modern art?
I think an artist will recognize how good the work on the social media is, because there's a lot of junk that is put out there. Kids that do a whole lot of rubbish, and it's supposed to be art. But I'm sure Thomas and Gavin will know that there is an inner sensitivity as an artist that you recognize what is the fake from what is the truth.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Thomas can't hear us, so he's just sitting there quietly.
Oh, can you not unmute him?
No, he actually can't hear us. I'm going to send him a message while Ryan just takes over.
I wanted to actually comment about something Thomas was saying. You know, he was saying that, you know, he comes from the other way around. He comes from an art sales and then into art background from what he was saying. And I found it very interesting that he experienced that, you know, his clients falling sort of under a spell of a specific thing that he was doing. And I think that leads into also what Regi is saying. And I would summarize it by saying that the way I see art is as a stimulant. And, you know, it's a stimulant visually, either aesthetically, emotionally, or intellectually. And it's that internal, as I keep saying, it's an internal presentation of something, and then you express it. Either however you express that, even at the banana, that's the idea that you're expressing. The product, the final thing that you've got there is just a banana stuck to a wall with duct tape, but it's an expression of something, and that acts as a stimulant and a catalyst for some people. And that is, as I said, either aesthetically, oh, wow, that's really beautiful, or emotionally, you make this amazing connection with it, perhaps not with the banana. or intellectually in the case of the banana. And you get into that discussion, what is art? And people start talking about, oh, I hate it, I love it. All of that is the actual art happening. There's this Venetian artist who used to bottle his own feces and sell it.
Yes.
And what was amazing about it is that after he died, one of the clients that had purchased the feces opened the bottle to find that it wasn't real feces, it was fake. But can you imagine the conversation with the gallery where the guy goes back and says, this isn't even real feces? That's the art right there. Right there, that's the art. That conversation is an art form. That expression of, you didn't even sell me the real stuff, is such a great meta commentary. It's gorgeous, you know. I think that picks up on what Regi is saying, and what Thomas was saying earlier, much earlier.
Definitely. I think, I'm just going to get hold of Thomas, and I'll just let Ryan take.
How can we get Thomas in the conversation?
I'm going to call him now. I want to call him now and deal with it, and then I'll just let Ryan take over in the meantime. Over to you, Ryan.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Great, so thanks, Gavin, and thanks, Regi, and to Thomas's intro. It's really inspiring listening to you, and I've learned an untold fortune that I actually didn't know before. So my question's slightly different, and it would be interesting. It's not necessarily much of a question; it's more proposal for just a discussion and to hear your views. Currently we live in a world of, or let me put it this way, the schooling environment or the educational environment that we live in, we are more prone towards, a business and to set yourself up in studying these degrees in more of a commercial way. And no one ever encourages to spur that inner talent and that inner skill that really is, inside of all of us. So, my proposal, my discussion is based on our current schooling system, or our current educational system. Gavin, you come from obviously an educational art background. Regi and Thomas, slightly informal. So you both have, experienced it in different ways. If you had to go back, or if you had to look at an aerial view of the educational system, how would you, look at that from an artistic perspective? Are they treating it differently? Are they neglecting it? Are they steering, students towards more commercial side? Is that inhibiting our talents that as South Africans that we have? Or are we behind the world when it comes to artistic, that you refer to these French countries, these Italian countries, or, these real cultural rich countries? Are we behind, or are we just steered in a different world? What are your thoughts on that? I think we can start with you, Gavin. I think it seems like
we are behind. I don't think we are behind. I think, especially in the rural areas, there's very much of a resurgence of making art. Children and artists, I went to work with Noria Mabata. They take the clay from the river and they make beautiful sculptures. So what is an artist? An artist is someone who sits down, has the patience, and just plays with its fingers the whole day. That's all.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Regi, just to pick up on that before we move on to Gavin, you drive around this country and you see such beautiful art on the side of the road, and you see, the ability that these people have, and the ability that they have from an artistic perspective. But there is something lacking. I feel there is something lacking in terms of its access to either resources or its access to materials. Yes. And, is that from, a young age? Is that from an educational system where arts and culture is put on the back end side of your preferred subject of choice? If I'm speaking more formally, what are your thoughts there?
I must say, I don't know. I don't know. You know, if you talk about not South Africa, about worldwide, we had a very important artist, one generation before, because he died, must have been my age. His name was Joseph Beuys. And he came with a concept and the idea that everyone is an artist. It's not, before I spoke about using your hands and creating something, but even a businessman is an artist if the way he approaches his business and the way he works is in a creative manner. Does it make sense?
It does. It does. It makes a fortune of sense. Okay. Definitely. Gavin, what are your thoughts on the situation?
I'm going to come in from a different angle here. You know, I recently finished a degree in space science, a master's in space science at University of Cape Town, just for fun.
Wow.
And the challenge the challenge that we have in that arena is that you've got something called STEM coming up now, which is to try and get technology, engineering, mathematics, and those kinds of things, get young kids interested in them, because they're difficult. You know, it's difficult to get somebody interested in mathematics or engineering or science, technology at an early age. So there's this big drive to STEM. But actually now, what has been happening over the past decade or so is that there's now a drive towards STEAM, and the A is for art, because it's very difficult to envisage some of the concepts in mathematics, in engineering, in science in general, without the vehicle of art, without the visual narrative. You know, art has served many purposes. It dates back a long way. You know, I was at Kachakama recently looking at the koi paintings and how they're a cultural history of the people of the area, and how art was used as a record, as a historical record, and you can see all sorts of things in that record about the people that lived there so long ago. And now we're again using art as a narrative in terms of science and technology, not only to understand the concepts, but also for everybody to then have access to these concepts. Art has always been that kind of vehicle. So, I mean, I hope this is making some kind of sense, but I think that's, you know, I was in Venice recently again. I spent a lot of time there, and there's one of the biggest schools of architecture there, and what they were worried and talking about a lot was the fact that the person teaching was imparting such a direct instruction to the students that you could actually see which students belonged to that teacher, because they ended up producing stuff very similar to the teacher, because that's kind of how they were channeled. So what Regi is saying, I think, is particularly relevant in that we actually need to have those less formal structures as well as alongside the formal structures, so that one can develop art from anything, from any direction, not just channel from one specific instruction set, if you want to put it that way. I'm really warmed by the idea of STEAM. I think it's a tremendous thing. I think that just taking those concepts and adding that visual paradigm is something that will drive the whole process forward. Art has always been, you know, I always think of art and science as the same thing. You know, science is at the edge of what we're trying to discover. You know, it's that boundary between known and unknown, and it's a bit scary being at that boundary. It's a bit terrifying because you don't know what's out there. And art is at that same boundary. And you know, as Regi was talking about earlier, these kinds of experimental and these kinds of art forms that are out there, they just take you across that border. They hold your hand and say, "It's okay. What do you think of this? I know it's out there, but what do you think?" And it just makes that circle of knowledge bigger. Art and science kind of overlap there dramatically. Am I making sense?
Yeah, it's such an interesting point. I mean, I haven't. It's a very unique point of view that I haven't actually put two and two together, and it's very interesting that you actually went to study, for fun, as you say, but in a scientific way. I suppose some people seem to see art as a completely different world to science, but you've made an interesting similarity.
It was fun because it was aeronautical engineers, electrical engineers, mathematicians in the class, and then me, the artist. But it was quite interesting because it was a multidisciplinary degree, and what came out of it was you actually needed to be able to look laterally a lot of the time to solve some of the problems that we're facing in the world, and science has very much always gone for a specific problem and a specific solution. So including the A in the STEAM means that you can now draw in from different narratives and different subject matter, and that's always going to be more powerful.
Great. Gavin, I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to pop back to Hilliard, and I'm sure Hilly will ask one or two more, but I just want to understand more your views on, the future of art, looking, going forward. We live in such a fourth industrial revolution with technology and social media, such an influence to people's lives. And from a young age, kids from a young age are picking up cell phones and have Facebook, have Instagram, and they're expressing themselves in different ways. Is that a positive? Is it a negative? What is the future in your mind of, art? Is the definition of art, of painting, is that going to be redefined with this change and revolution? Just putting yourself 10, 15 years from now, as well as perhaps looking prospectively, what are we in for in the art world, in your eyes?
Who would you
maybe
like
a difficult.
That's an interesting question. I'll go all the way back to when we were still running around thousands of years ago, before we even made formal societies. And I think one of our earliest expressions is art. One of our earliest expressions that you would say, okay, that makes us human, is in terms of the way that we could use abstract thought, and when we started to develop writing and things like that, all these kinds of artistic expressions. And as for the future, I was having this discussion with a man named Jürgen Schmidhuber, who's one of the foremost people in the AI revolution. And he's working on machine learning in a clinic in Switzerland. And we got into a big discussion about art, because he's been trying to program a computer to be artistic. And the second you say that, it's like this, what? How dare he? It cannot be done. But the interesting thing is that he's suggesting that it is possible for computers to be creative. It is possible for a machine intelligence to be creative if you teach it in a specific kind of way. As terrifying as that might sound, it doesn't have to be. I think if we want to know ourselves and if we want to know others, I think creativity is at the heart of that. I think if we want to look beyond our group to other groups, if we want to be all inclusive, that's about creativity. It's about seeing beyond what is just your own. And art has always been the champion of that, seeing beyond what is just your own. And I think the future, therefore, and yes, there's 100 million different types of social media and things out there. It doesn't matter how you express creativity. It's just that thinking. As I said earlier, it's about what's in your mind, and it's about then how you translate that to the world. But it starts in your mind. And if we can encourage that creativity within the mind, I think that takes us into a good place going forward. I think we have to look beyond the group that we're in. I think it's vital that we stop thinking of just in terms of our one group, and we start thinking in terms of being in different groups at the same time, overlapping circles as opposed to just being in the one circle. And I think that art is a great vehicle for achieving such a thing.
Sorry, if I may add to that, are you hearing me?
Yes, we got you.
Yeah.
if I may add to that, there's no way to assess what the future of art is, because if you look at the history of art, it's always one thing that is opposing another, and you don't know what artists will go for. So it's difficult to assess what will be the future in art. And although Gavin speaks about a computer or a robot who can make art, it still has to be fair. It still has to be fair.
I knew you were going to pick up on that.
That is, you see, that's why art is so humane.
I'm going to jump in here because
I think so.
Thomas has been trying to get in and out, and unfortunately he's still not hear us. But I have sent him some questions directly, so I have just he's up. So if you just unmute yourself, Thomas, and just try to answer some of those questions. Obviously you can't hear us now.
I just messaged him. Yeah, there we go. Okay, there we go.
Right.
I guess that's my turn.
Yes.
Sorry about the technical hitches, eh? What did I buy for investment purposes? I'll buy myself. So, well, I don't have any artists that out, but if ever I to buy any artist for investment purposes, I think that would be an artist that I will consider is better than myself. Because I mean, all in all, I believe that art is a skill of taking what's on the inside and to the outside. And I think that takes guts. So if I can do that and I have to invest in somebody else, they gotta be better than me. Yeah. I guess that's my question as well. What do you think inspires people to buy art? I think what inspires people to buy art is more like political, social, and religious views. I also think what makes them buy art is appreciation of art. I think there are so many things that are involved in one buying art, because sometimes we get people buying art for status. Just because it's a big name, my friends and my neighbors also own big names. So many people buy art for such purposes as well, which for me, I think is it's not something that I believe is the right thing to do. I believe that one should buy art as much as it relates to themselves. And also speaking about, so I have to read my questions and stuff. Yeah.
Sorry.
But also speaking about what advice other than buy what you like do you have for it? I was looking to start their own art collection. I would say, yeah, buy what you like, but also get educated around art, so that at least what you buy and you understand what's the spiritual worth, what's it's what you invest. Yeah.
I'm just going to jump in here and just wait for Thomas to see the messages typed in. But what is the most important thing to understand?
The most important thing to understand when buying art,
there we go,
I would say, is there are so many things that actually understanding when you art. One, you have to know like what inspires the artist, what is the art about, what is the story of the artist. The reason I'm speaking of the story of artists is because most galleries do not tell the story of the artist, because galleries in most cases are not related to the artists that they sell. So I think it is always important for one buying art to meet with the art, that they can understand further what exactly was going on in the artist's life at that stance.
Regi, is there anything you would like to add to that? I mean, what is the most important thing you consider when buying a piece of art?
Are you talking to me, Regi?
Yes.
Sorry. I will agree entirely with Thomas that the buyer must inform himself about art and about the piece and actually study what it's all about. And then he must choose according to his gut feeling. Although, because he will have galleries and dealers pushing him this way and the other way, and then we are slipping into that very dangerous thought of art as an investment or art as an indulgence. You know what my thoughts are.
Yes.
So it's just that, have you seen the movie? It's called The Price of Everything. Get that movie. It's fabulous. It's all about investments. It's very well made. It's 2018. And the price of everything. Unfortunately, I don't like the word investment, because you buy something so that and you're paying money so that you can get more out of it at a later stage. It's a resellable item. And so for me, the artwork is diluted as its value is mainly on the product. I will go so far as very often the poetry, the beauty, the effect of the artwork arising different emotions in people is put aside, because when
I think we might have lost Regi there. It seems to be everyone's got just a bit of bad Wi-Fi signal tonight, or it might just be me. But Gavin and Ryan, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe Gavin, let's jump to you. Hopefully her connection will join back. But let's stay on the same topic. Art, is it indulgement? Is it an investment? Is it buy because you like it? Just your views on this.
Well, just off the top of my head, I mean, depending on your political views, anything you buy is an indulgence other than food. And I've never met anyone that didn't see value in music and value in art. So, I mean, I think it comes down to how much one should spend, and that comes down to person by person kind of basis. Advice to people that are getting involved in buying art for the first time, or people that are already involved. Usually you buy art for its stimulation, that aesthetic stimulation or intellectual stimulation or that kind of thing. Or you can buy art because you are considering as an investment. Either way, that's seeing value in the artist themselves, not the painting per se. So if it's an unknown artist and that person stays unknown, then the value of the painting is normally tied to the brand of the artist, the identity of the artist. That said, some artists have painted one or two things at the most, have been completely obscure for their entire lives, and then the painting becomes fabulously wealthy afterwards. I think when you start out buying an art, you buy for an aesthetic. You buy something that you really like and that moves you specifically. And that might always differ from an investment piece. An investment piece is something which is determined value by someone else, not yourself necessarily. You might see value in a specific painting that's sold for 100 rands, and you might love that and take that home. Whereas an art critic might see a painter that you don't particularly like. For me, it's Van Gogh. I cannot stand Van Gogh's work. But it has great value in the market. Or Andy Warhol, another one that I just can't deal with.
One of my favorites.
I'm just muting you. Hang on, let me just mute you, Hilly. So I mean,
I don't know what happened.
There you go.
I talking to nobody for such a long time?
For a while, but I think we got some of it.
Did you?
Well, I'll finish my point and then kick in after me. So I mean, you might always be at odds with an investment piece, but remember, an investment piece of art you're almost never going to hang on your wall. If it's for an investment purpose, you're never going to allow that thing to be UV damaged, or it's going to be in a vault somewhere. I had an investor buy. Yeah, it is sad. It is sad. I had an investor buy a couple of my pieces, and he did exactly that, and I was horrified. For me, that it wasn't. It's not about that. It's about the art being out there. But from an investment point of view, it's a very different thing. So you must follow, I think, your own aesthetic in the beginning. If you want to also buy, I think that they're almost exclusive paths. I think an investment piece is almost always not going to be something that you particularly. I'm not talking the Picassos and things like that. That's a very, very different game. I'm talking about a piece that, as Regi was saying, you will see as something that appreciates in value over time. But that appreciation of value is determined by the perception of the brand of the artist, and that's not something which you control. That's something which is controlled externally to you. So those two paths will probably diverge over time. So I think you should treat them as separate things. I think if you're going to buy art now, you should buy art that you like and that you want on your walls. Because I think that's the primary starting place. And if you want to buy an investment piece, then you treat it like any investment. Then it's not up to you what it looks like. It's up to just what the pure value is perceived to be by an external body. So I think these are two very separate decisions, and I don't think that you should necessarily think that they are one and the same. I don't think that they are per se.
And Gavin, can I just ask you something? I've quite followed the artist's cause. I collect some of his vinyl figures, and there's been a lot of talk, which is in the industry, and just some of the followings I have that, his products are now becoming mass produced just for the mere fact to generate income and make money.
You mean like Andy Warhol?
Yeah, well, he's dead. So it's not really him, but I say, causes, people are saying he's doing this himself, and now it's becoming a money-making scheme, which is actually, some people say, driving down the value of his art. I'm sure.
I mean, if you look at Damien Hirst, if you look at Mark Foxteby, all of them have hundreds of people that work for them. Again, I want to say it's not about the actual product. It's about what's in the mind of that person that created it. How that translation is realized from brain to physical, to me, is not that important. If it's put onto a vinyl figure, if it's put onto a cassette tape, if it's put onto Snapchat, whatever that is, if it's put onto Facebook, whatever, however that happens isn't as relevant as what that original artistic idea was in the mind of whoever created it. So yes, people will say, it's becoming very commercial, blah, 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 blah. People said that about Andy Warhol at the time. Okay, they were right. But still, obviously his work is of massive value. The same as of Hirst and things like that. It isn't, Hirst didn't make his fortune out of the shark, probably his most seminal work. But it certainly built him up in terms of art critics and art collectors, in terms of the idea that was there. You know, now if you look at his work, like the dots and things that he does, they're very different. But you're investing now in the idea of Hirst, not in the product of Hirst. I think we must differentiate between those two ideas, because when it comes to purchasing art, they become very important to see as separate entities.
Yeah. Wow.
Great. Wow, Gavin, that was moving. Just to take over from you, Hilly, I'm going to propose a question to Thomas, as well as to the rest of you. I did write Thomas the question, as well as I'm not sure if he can hear me currently, but I'll propose the question. I'd like Thomas to answer it first, and then we can move on to Gavin and end off with you, Regi. So the question is, on a final note, more looking at a 3,000 meter view back, and just looking at art as a whole, as well as to young inspiring artists. The intention of these webinars are to inspire, to provide inspiration towards people that are interested in this topic of conversation. And obviously there is form of education that we have given, as well as there's immense amount of knowledge that we've gained in your views and thoughts, etc. But just what advice would you have to young artists, to inspiring artists in this country across all mediums? Art can be defined as painting a picture, obviously in the most simplest form, to, as Regi mentioned, from a business side, to dance, to movies, to shows, to singing, etc. What advice do you have, especially considering the current time that, the tough time that we've been going through in the past 6 months? What advice do you have to, a 2 cents to our audience, to leave us off on, a good note, to give us some inspiration? Thomas, I'm not sure if you can hear us.
Ron, I'm messaging him just to see.
Okay, I think maybe we'll start with you, Gavin, and then from there we'll try to get back to Thomas. I think you're on mute, Gavin.
Sorry. Advice for young artists: draw inspiration from everything and everyone, not just the traditional. Literally from everything. I started painting, I'll tell you quickly, because I was looking at the Mars Orbital Surveyor, which takes photographs of Mars, and I was looking at the daily photos that it takes, as one does. And I noticed that one of the images was damaged. There was a piece of snow halfway through the image. And I thought, that's really interesting, because we see that as like a damage or loss of information. But actually what it was a solar flare perhaps hit the satellite at a specific angle, and it caused the circuit to malfunction in a certain way. And it's actually information itself. Everything is information. We just decide what we want to process and what we don't want to process. But that's just something we do that's artificial. Everything is information. And actually, I got into painting in my style because I looked at that particular image, and it really made me think. So it's, drawing inspiration from everything and everyone, not just your teachers. And another important thing, and this is something which is sometimes more difficult to discuss, and some artists get very prickly about this, as they see it as commercial, but I'm going to say it anyway. You really need to understand the person buying the work. Art is a conversation, and it is a conversation between the artist and the patron. It's very important that there is a patron. You're not just painting stuff and putting it in your attic and leaving it there forever. I mean, I wish Andy Warhol had done that, obviously. But it's about that conversation, It's not just about you. It's about that vehicle of an idea coming from your mind, and you passing that idea as you can, in whatever form that you can, along to someone else and say, what do you think of this? So you put that painting on the wall and it's you still having that conversation. What do you think of this? So you actually need to take that person into account. It's not just about what you want to paint. It's not just about what you want to express. It's also about that other person, that other patron. And I know that this is quite contentious, but it makes a massive difference when it comes to things like selling art, because at the end of the day, we also do need to eat. You know, I think of myself not just as Gavin Rain. I'm part of Gavin Rain. I'm just a part of it. There are many other people that form Gavin Rain. Okay, so there's me, the painter, but there's also the guys that I work with in my studio that prepare my canvas and my paint, my studio manager and my agent and my marketers and my distributors and people like you that are bringing this message out there. And yes, about the patron at the end of the line who trusts me enough and believes in Gavin Rain enough to actually spend money and actually buy the work. And that's a very important part of the conversation that's often overlooked. You know, I've got this great friend, Paolo Loschi, who I consider one of the greatest painters of our times, and you've never heard of him, and he never sells any work. And I did my very first show with him in Milan, and he painted these absolutely brilliant portraits, but they were very, very depressing. They were of very ugly, depressed people, and he couldn't sell them. What I loved about Paolo, which is almost unrelated, but he was selling them for like, I think 500 euros each, and he didn't sell any. And I managed to sell out my work because it was all happy and stuff. And then on the second day, I saw him go and change the price. So it was 500 euros. So then I went to look what he'd done, and it was 1,000 euros. And I thought that was just such a lovely touch, you know. But at the end of the day, it is also about you might feel that you want to have a conversation about something which is gruesome and whatever, but at the end of the day, the patron isn't going to connect to that. It is about connecting. Art is about connecting to people and about having a conversation. And you must realize that you're just one side of the conversation. You must also realize that there are many other parts of this conversation. Your gallerists, your agents, your distributors, all of these people are a part of what you're doing. They're a part of that world and a very, very important part of the world. You're not the most important part. You're just a part. And as an artist, sometimes we get ahead of ourselves. And if I gave any point of advice, it would always be this point to a young artist. And I will say it over and over again, that you must see where you fit into things. Strike out creatively, do your own thing. But at the end of the day, realize that you're a part of this whole process and that you fit into this process. Yeah.
Gavin.
Great. Thanks, Gavin.
May I interrupt?
Please.
Sorry.
Regi.
Gavin, you're talking about established artists. I think the question was about young people wanting to go into the art world.
Let me add that point. Let me add to that point. Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that a lot of young artists come to me and they ask me, okay, so I want to do this. I look at the work and I say, okay, that's great. But do you think you can maybe do it in slightly different way to express? And they're like, no, it has to be this way. I'm talking about that inflexibility where they are so hell-bent on a very specific vision. And I think that's what I'm talking about, is that you need that conversation with all the people that are involved in art, not just yourself. Yeah. You've got this massive sort of internal dialogue going on. And I think it's important that you share that dialogue and that it is a dialogue. It's not a dictation. And I think that that's the point that I would make to a young artist, is that you enter into those dialogues when you start. Does that make sense, Regi?
Yes, it does. But I think I would say that a young artist, someone who wants to start into the world of art, should just find a chair, a piece of paper, some charcoal, pencils, and spend time. Because as you said, when you start drawing, you look at a tree, you look at a landscape, straight away something else happens. And I really believe in the virtue of just taking a material and just spending time and just making marks.
Sure, very amazing.
Then afterwards, if they still have the passion, then from making marks and pencils and charcoal, they try with color. And then they will find a teacher. There's always other artists who are prepared to give advice, etc. Except, especially as you said, with the social media. If one has a computer, you can get you can get good knowledge, you can get nonsense, but you can be helped. That's my little bit.
Can I add to that?
Thanks, Regi. Gavin, I'd love to hear your views. I just feel we're lacking to hear Thomas. And
yeah,
I know
I'd love to hear from Thomas.
He's urging to share his views. So perhaps Thomas, you can get started and give us your own advice.
I just told him now, just give him a thumbs up to say he's up, because unfortunately he still can't hear us.
Thomas, it's up to you.
My best advice to artists in this season that going through hard periods, especially for artists. So that being said, I advise that they should, they are on the sake of their sanity, just keep on working. They must do it. They must keep a positive look. Like the turmoils, it's all to keep their venture to comes over them and experience for it's easy, go out, we have been hit hard careers. It's easy for us to people working. But above that, I can say that they should also look out for the people around them. People have become annoyed to listen. So, paint, scout the fears of the people, and just keep a positive outlook there, and also, spread a message of joy, beauty. I mean, still beauty after also. That's what I can tell artists to do. Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Thomas. And I could spend another hour here speaking and listening to your guys' story. We do like to keep our events, within the hour. We have run over 15 minutes, but I've already got people commenting to say, amazing, well done, extremely inspirational.
That's what I'm getting. I'm also getting speech. I can hear all of you.
Yeah, I think I've just had a bit of technical issues, but like I said, we're still getting people commenting that it was really inspirational, amazing. You guys are phenomenal. Regi, your grandson Daniel says he loves you dearly and admires you extreme amounts.
It's reciprocal, adorable.
And the feedback has really been amazing. And my closing remarks are something that Rabbi Masinta tries to instill in us. And he says, one of the 10 commandments is do not steal. And what does that mean? On a simple level, it means do not take somebody's glasses or do not steal somebody's piece of art. But when you look at that on a deeper level, it means do not rob the world of your talents. And I think, Gavin, when we look at you and Regi and Thomas, this is something that you guys really live with on a day-to-day basis. And you really, you give your talents to the world. And we thank you for that. And we thank you once again for giving of your time. And, keep inspiring, keep doing what you're doing, and keep making the world a better, happier place with your art. So thank you very much for your time. We really do appreciate it. It's really been phenomenal. And hopefully we'll have you back on soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hilly and Ryan. Thanks for setting this up.
Very
much. And to the best-looking rabbi that I know, from Shabbat Rabbi Masinta, thank you so much for setting this all up. And to my fellow panelists, it was great chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. I've learned a lot. Thank you.